Chapter 3 of Pioneer Work in the Alps of New Zealand by Arthur Paul Harper. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Chapter 3 Westland. The west coast of New Zealand, the forest and its plants. Birds. In August 1893, I applied to and obtained work from the Westland Survey Department, in conjunction with Mr. C.E. Douglas, to continue the exploration and mapping of the rivers and glaciers with their surrounding ranges. Mr. Douglas had been working for some 20 years, following and traversing rivers to their sources, but none of the larger glaciers had been explored, except the moraine-covered Strauchan on the Copeland River and Balfour Glacier on the central branch of Cook River. This was owing to the want of a man experienced in ice work, Douglas having, as a rule, only carried his work to the snow line, and having neither companion nor alpine equipment, was unable to go into high altitudes. Before relating my own experiences amongst the Westland glaciers and Alps, it will be as well to give a short description of the country. This will allow my readers to form some idea of the conditions under which our work had to be carried on. Westland, or West Coast, as it is more commonly called, was rushed by gold diggers in the early 60s, and a large amount of gold was found and exported. Now, however, it has become, from a digging point of view, a field of far less importance. True, there are still many working the alluvial ground, but those making more than tucker are few, and it is many years since a rise of importance has been made by anyone. The country itself, except for a few clearings made by settlers, may be said to be covered with dense evergreen bush, forest, up to 3,000 feet above sea level, which gradually merges into a low, impenetrable scrub growing perhaps 500 feet higher, until it gives way to luxuriant snowgrass and other alpine plants. There is a narrow strip of more or less flat country, that is, rough, low hills, with patches of actually flat land between the ranges and the sea, varying from 25 to 5 miles in width. It is of little value from an agricultural or pastoral point of view, covered as it is with bush, forest, and costing more than its value to clear. Here and there are large tracts of swampy ground, useless to man or beast at present, but which may prove valuable if properly drained. These large swamps are usually to be found between the rivers on the flat country, and with few exceptions confine the settlers to the river flats near the sea, where the best land is to be found. To a casual visitor, there would seem to be in Westland an inexhaustible amount of marketable timber, both on the flat country and in the ranges. The truth is, however, that beyond a certain amount on the low country there is very little. In the ranges and up the rivers there is practically none of value, and those trees which are worth cutting are so scattered that they would be unworkable by any mill fixed in one locality. It is doubtful if the timber up the rivers will be more than sufficient to build and keep in repair culverts and bridges, when such are constructed. On the Arawata and Blue rivers in the far south of the country there is a very fine patch of birch, really a beech, bush, which could be worked with advantage from one centre. Douglas speaks of trees 42 feet in circumference, with a clean trunk of 90 feet to the lowest limb, growing on the Arawata. At present, however, the means of communication with the rest of the colony are very poor, a fact which adds greatly to the difficulty of making either farming or any other industry remunerative. The gold industry is the mainstay of the southern part of Westland, and there is little doubt that, should the output of the precious metal cease, there would be small inducement for a population to stay in the district. A few, possibly, who prefer a free and unfettered existence in a part of the colony where they can easily make a small living, may consent to dwell in such an out-of-the-way locality. It is, however, more than probable that the minerals of Westland will continue to give employment to some number, especially when better means of communication are provided, which will allow them to be worked at less cost with more chance of profit. The only connection with the rest of the colony is by steamer and coach, while south of Ross the communication is precarious to say the least, only a pack-horse mail running at present. In my opinion, Westland has a great future before it, if properly and energetically pushed as a tourist resort. Nowhere else in New Zealand is there such magnificent scenery, equalling, if not surpassing, that of Switzerland and Norway in grandeur. But it is out of reach of the ordinary tourist, unless he is willing to rough it considerably, while to see the finest views in the southern Alps on this side, Days and weeks of hardship must be faced, which would frighten most people. Before any noticeable benefit can be felt from tourists, some steps must be taken to make means of transit easier. At present, owing to the unbridged state of the rivers and frequent rain, there is great risk of loss of time by being stuck up by floods. But until we have a large neighbouring population, a government would hardly be justified in going to great expense in making roads and bridges. The bush. Note: in New Zealand, the forest is always spoken of as bush, as opposed to lower growth vegetation, which is called scrub. End of note. Or forest of New Zealand has often been described, but even had nothing been said on the subject, it would require a more gifted pen than mine to depict its beauties. The fascination which it has over all those who see or work in it cannot be understood by one who has not experienced it. I will not attempt to describe the innumerable beautiful ferns and mosses, and the wonderful colouring of the bush, which never cease to exercise their power over even the oldest hand, if he has any love of fine effects. When toiling through dense undergrowth, cutting a track, or carrying a heavy load, I found time to enjoy the lovely effects and fairy-like scenes met with at every turn. Yet, in spite of its many attractions, it is a serious drawback to such work as ours, or in fact, to any which entails much travelling. Even the oldest bushman may find himself temporarily bushed, but a good man can, by use of common sense and coolness, generally find his way out somewhere, not necessarily at the place he wants to go to, but at least to some locality from which he can easily reach habitation. Common sense is not, unfortunately, a strong point with some, if we may judge by the frequent absurd actions of persons lost in the bush. For half the year it is easy to build a shelter with bark, and at all times with ferns, while no one need be without a good fire, unless, of course, he has no matches. Those who have in the past suffered from exposure have done so for want of a little thought. But many, when bushed, seem to lose their reasoning powers, for there are cases in which it has not occurred to men in such a plight to kindle a fire, even though they have a plentiful supply of matches, nor to try and snare a bird, or eat some of the edible plants in the bush, when suffering from hunger. When, however, we hear that there have been men who, on being lost in hilly country covered with timber, have, on reaching a river, actually gone upstream in order to get into the low country, it is hardly surprising that the misfortune of being bushed is often serious in its effects. Though there are several edible plants, they are not very nourishing, nor can I honestly say very nice. However, a hungry man must eat what he can get, and I have often been glad of even a small feed of pica fern, Asplenium bulbiferum. This is perhaps the best of our natural foods, and the curled, crozier-like shoot is quite passable when boiled for an hour. In addition to this is the head of the young supplejack, Parsomsia albiflora, a vine which grows in immense quantities up to nearly 2,000 feet above sea level, and is about as bad an obstacle to force a way through as I know. The kihiki, Freycinetia banksii, which grows on the lower hills near the sea, wild parsley, Angelica geniculata, spinach, Tetragonia expansa, and root of the bracken fern, Terra sesculenta, are also eatable. In the low country, that is, below 1,200 or 2,000 feet, the undergrowth in the bush is bad beyond descriptions, especially where supplejacks and lawyers, Rubus australis, abound. For the benefit of those who have never been in New Zealand, it may be explained that a lawyer is a bramble which grows in very dense masses and is covered with small thorns. It is so named because, when once a man is unfortunate enough to get into its clutches, he finds it hard to free himself. These most obstructive plants are fortunately not found above 1,500 feet from sea level, unless the hill has sea frontage. Besides the plants already mentioned as eatable, there are others possessing valuable medicinal qualities. The best known of these is perhaps the coromico, a shrub belonging to the Veronica tribe, which makes a good tonic, useful in cases of dysentery, and has already been used to make a patent medicine. A certain portion of the flax plant, Phormium tenax, has an effect opposite to the coromico. For external use we have the gum of the miro pine, Podocarpus ferruginea, the finest healing ointment for an open wound that I have ever used, and a sure cure for warts. The Maoris often take the leaf of the pepper tree, Drimus axillaris, and after chewing it apply it to a wound, which it is said to heal very soon, leaving a blue tattoo mark. The leaf, I think, is more or less poisonous and should be avoided, like all those shrubs which have leaves with white undersides and dark above. For camping purposes, it would be difficult indeed to surpass the New Zealand forest, and in the mountain ranges of the west coast, though we grumble at the work it involves, we really have great cause to be thankful for it. The eastern slopes of the southern Alps are open and grass-covered, a great contrast to the densely timbered ranges of the west coast. In the one district, the want of firewood for camping purposes is felt, and in the other too much timber gives a party a great deal of heavy work when travelling. If it were possible to split the difference, each side would be all that could be desired for explorations, easy travelling combined with good camping grounds. Between October and March in the mountains, within 3,000 feet of sea level, it is really not necessary to carry canvas unless, of course, one is fastidious as to shelter. It is always possible to build a good whare or maimai, with bark stripped from the rata, Metrosideros robusta, totara, Podocarpus totara, or cedar, Libocedrus bidwillii trees, all or some of which are to be found up the rivers. Of firewood there is such an inexhaustible supply and good variety to select from, that it is always possible to keep a fire burning without any necessity to economize, a great consideration in wet weather. There is the rata tree, the prince of firewoods, very hard, and burning almost like coal, dry or green. Miki, aki, kamahi, or so-called red birch, white and black birches, which are really beeches, the mountain broom, ribbonwood, broadleaf, totara, and many others, all burning in a green state, though the first 6 or 7 are the best and always available in the ranges. While enumerating thus shortly the advantages and disadvantages of the bush, I cannot pass over one of the greatest charms of camp life and work in unexplored country, namely, the birds, to whom man is a stranger. They are not only useful as food, and enable 2 of us to do work which really required 4 men, but they provide us with endless amusement when together, and are especially welcome when one is working or camping alone. First and foremost of these is the weka, Oxydromus australis, wood hen or Maori hen, as he is variously called, as good a camp companion as one could wish for, with his tameness, impudence, and almost human power of expression. I have never studied a weka in or near civilization, but as found in the hitherto unvisited valleys, in which my last 2 years have chiefly been spent, he is only approached by the kia, or mountain parrot, as a source of amusement and interest. Often Douglas and I have sighed for the powers of the artist whose Zigzags at the Zoo in the Strand magazine helped many a wet day to pass, wherewith to depict the many knowing expressions of the weka and kia. Perhaps it is almost unnecessary to say that the weka is a bird with small, unformed wings, unable to fly, and varying in size from a partridge to a pheasant. In plumage he is not unlike the former, sometimes dark brown and sometimes a very light colour, according to whether his habitation is in narrow and gloomy valleys or open grass country. He walks with a very genteel step, and bobs his short tail up spasmodically, his whole action suggesting the exaggerated motions of a teacher of deportment, if such a person exists outside novels. The male and female only keep together during the breeding season, and if the place they choose for their temporary abode happens to be productive of the necessaries of weka life, the cock drives his mate and family away at the end of the season, remaining in solitary possession of a good feeding ground. Should, however, the locality be indifferently productive, Mr. Weka bids the family a glad farewell on completion of his domestic duties, and seeks happier hunting grounds for himself. As to food, he is omnivorous, eating everything from a pea rifle cartridge to the remains of one of his own tribe, or even family. I remember an instance of this when our dog unfortunately killed a young bird before we could prevent it, which was too small to eat. The parents made a decent show of grief over their loss, and then, being quite sure that the little one was dead, they proceeded to eat its still warm remains. In camp, the birds are useful as scavengers, but they are incorrigible thieves, trying to take away everything at all white or glittering. And as they are able to move a weight of 2 or 3 pounds, it can well be imagined that a careful lookout has to be kept. The glance of mingled triumph and contempt which a weka gives over his shoulder as he walks off with your pipe is inimitable, and his whole attitude would make a most laughable picture if well drawn. One of these birds will take full possession of a camp as soon as he discovers it, generally within a few hours of its being pitched, and rarely have we been without one or a pair. No other birds or rats are allowed to come near if he can help it, but are attacked without hesitation. And if another weka dares to intrude, the one in possession will, 9 times out of 10, manage to make good his claim, though sometimes the combatants seem very unevenly matched for a fight. Possession is 9 points of the law. They even rush wildly at a thrush or crow, though far out of reach above them, and often resort to stratagem to induce the object of their attack to come within reach. I have seen a weka run under a shrub on which a thrush was sitting and try to frighten him. This had no effect, so our friend walked away out of sight, and in a few minutes returned, and when he had come under the thrush, he suddenly tumbled down, and with stiffened limbs and ruffled feathers, feigned to be dead. It was a fine piece of acting, but he had one wicked little eye open. The thrush looked at the motionless weka for a second or two, and then began to sing, as much as to say, "I've played this game before," leaving our friend to get up and try not to look foolish. The thrush never seems to fall into the trap. The weka, though very clever in carrying out his scheme, sometimes tries it on 2 or 3 times in succession, which shows some want of intelligence. For downright impudence, too, the weka is unequalled, and no doubt this fact will help to preserve him against his new foe, the weasel, so kindly turned loose by a paternal, or shall I say maternal, government. Though really no match for such an antagonist, he will by mere bluff frighten it, for if he sees the weasel first, he will charge it, though I fear if vice versa, he will run away. The weka will figure often in these pages, so for the present we will leave him. The robin, Miro albifrons, is a constant companion in some localities, as far as the bush limit. He differs from his English namesake very little, only having a yellow instead of a red breast. They are quite tame and generally called dear gentle little things, but in reality they are the most vicious and quarrelsome little birds it is possible to imagine. A family of 4 or 5 seem to spend their whole time in fighting, a great contrast to the weka family. When one is cutting or climbing through the bush, a robin nearly always follows close behind, picking up grubs exposed in the footsteps, and depositing them under moss or in holes in a tree for future use. Of songbirds we find a great number in the back country, away from the haunts of men, notably the crow, Glaucopus cinerea, which has a note like a rich-toned flageolet, the most beautiful bird I have heard in our ranges. Besides him are the bellbirds, mentioned by Captain Cook, and getting very scarce. The tui, canary, and many others, all of which swell the chorus, heard every morning and evening. The canaries, Orthonyx orchrocephala, and the little mountain wrens, Xenacus filviventris, are useful as foretellers of weather, for they always collect in flocks and keep up a lively chirping some hours before an approaching storm, a warning which we never allow to pass unnoticed. For the camp pot there is a varied choice. The weka is perhaps the most nourishing, having a large amount of oil when in good condition. Over 1/4 of a pint can be obtained from a fat bird, which, though not very palatable, is sustaining and can be baked with flour to advantage. The kiwi is passable when one is hungry, though personally I do not like him, but being more nutritious than savoury, it is not to be despised, and is almost nice when boiled with piki fern and rice. The kiwi is a wingless bird, and still fairly plentiful in out-of-the-way places, but on the whole is fast becoming extinct. The West Coast kiwi, Apteryx oweni, is a small grey bird, differing from the North Island species, Apteryx mantelli, which is dark brown and more coarsely made. With the help of a good dog, they can generally be caught asleep in the daytime, being entirely night birds. Sometimes in the spring 1 or generally 2 eggs are to be found with a pair in their retreat, but chiefly owing to cats and weasels, there are more solitary birds than originally. The only way to account for this is that, owing to the unknown enemy which has appeared, they become frightened and are unwilling to pair. To quote Mr. Douglas, "Mrs. Kiwi probably says, 'What is the good of my laying that awful egg if a weasel sucks it while we are actually sitting on it?'" The size of the egg is well known, and it is hard to believe that so small a bird can lay one so large. However, not one but generally two are produced. Both birds sit to hatch this, which is nearly as large as a black swan's egg. Note. See Appendix. Note 3. End of note. For one could not possibly cover it alone, and there is little doubt that the warmth of decayed vegetable matter contributes largely to the hatching. Though laying 2 eggs, they only hatch 1, and I have heard it suggested that the second is laid later and used to feed the young one, for though there is only 1 young bird, there are generally the remains of 2 eggs, and 2 are frequently found before hatching. During the daytime they sleep in a standing position, with their heads tucked down between their legs, looking like a fluffy ball on 2 sticks. When taking a kiwi from its hole, great care must be observed if the skin is required for stuffing, for while the body is warm the feathers or hair fall out in handsful wherever they are touched, but after it is cold it is the hardest bird to pluck I know. The kaka, Nestor meridionalis, kakapo, Stringops habruptilis, and kia, Nestor notabilis, of the parrot tribe, the wood pigeon, blue, grey, and paradise ducks, are all excellent for eating, and if one is hard pushed for food, the smaller birds such as the crow, tui, parakeet, and saddlebacks are all acceptable. The kakapo is found in South Westland, the Sounds country of Otago, and the Nelson province. He is rarely, if ever, seen away from the birch forests. He is a large ground parrot with a bright green plumage, and, except for descending from a rock or bluff 30 feet in height, his wings are useless to him. Like the kiwi, he is a night bird, living in holes and under rocks all day. As food, he comes second only to the weka, having a large quantity of fine oil in his body, of a light straw colour. We capture him with the help of our dog, and he shows a great deal of fight before he surrenders. This bird apparently performs an operation on his food, akin to chewing the cud, that is, he collects a large amount of grass in his crop, and retires to his refuge to chew it, and when all the juice has been extracted, he throws the grass out in dry bowls. After feeding, these birds make a booming noise, not unlike the grunt of a pig, and though it can be heard for a great distance, it is quite impossible to locate it. Probably the fact of the bird being in a hole will account for the deceptive nature of the sound. I have heard the noise apparently within a few yards of me, and have been surprised and angry at the dog not looking for the bird where I pointed, but instead of doing so, he has run off up the hillside for some considerable distance, and in a few moments the shrieking of the bird and barking of the dog will show that the noise had deceived me completely. The crop of a kakapo, when freshly killed, makes a capital poultice if applied to a sore, drawing out all poisonous matter quickly and effectually, so the Maoris say. Though one of our largest birds, it has an egg not much bigger than of a pigeon, a great contrast to the enormous egg produced by such a small bird as the grey kiwi. It would be both reasonable and convenient, I should imagine, if they could change eggs. Blue or mountain ducks, Nestor rotabilis, are not now found in any numbers except in the upper parts of hitherto unvisited rivers, and make a very welcome addition to our supplies, which are generally at a somewhat low ebb by the time we reach the head of a river. They appear to have the rivers and creeks marked off in regular divisions, never encroaching on the preserves of another, or allowing intrusion by a strange couple. I have seen many instances of this rule of division, and proved it by driving 2 or 3 pairs downstream with their broods, and finding them all in their own claims next morning. Many a fight can be seen between 2 pairs when a strange couple try to jump a claim. Their chief weapon of attack is a horny growth on the second joint of the wing. Unlike most New Zealand birds, the male and female are partners all the year round, but the female alone sits on the eggs while the male keeps guard and feeds her. The paradise duck, Casarca variegata, is too much like a tough goose in my opinion, but the flappers, or young ones, are very good indeed when roasted. Here, again, we find a peculiarity. These ducks will sometimes build their nest in a tree 30 feet from the ground, but by what means they bring their young ones to terra firma or water, I cannot say. Possibly they carry them on their backs, but if they followed the usual happy-go-lucky laws of nature in New Zealand, it is as likely as not that the promising brood is allowed to tumble out one by one and trust to Providence. Scientific descriptions and names of our birds can be found in Sir Walter Buller's Birds of New Zealand. The above short description is not intended by any means to be complete for that would be unnecessary. But certain interesting habits of the birds can be noted by those who see them in their undisturbed and natural haunts, which scientists may not have been able to obtain, having had few opportunities to go far from civilization. It is a sad fact that most of the native birds of the country are gradually disappearing. In the early days, those who went into unknown country found thousands of birds of all kinds, but now, even in localities hitherto unvisited by man, birds are scarce. Sometimes, of course, they are as numerous as formerly, but I have been into valleys where hardly a bird was to be seen of any kind. This is largely due to cats and weasels. The digger is very fond of his cat, and nearly always carries one with him. But in the past, when new rushes were frequent, he would go off at a moment's notice from his camp or hut, and if the cat was not at hand, it was left behind, and naturally became wild. These have increased and multiplied enormously, and I have seen their tracks miles up unexplored valleys. It has been several years since the coast was overrun by wild cats, and now weasels are added to the list of enemies which the birds have to contend against. It is therefore only a question of time before our most interesting birds, those that cannot fly, become extinct. The government has widely set apart 2 large islands on which to preserve birds and plants, and they seem to be answering their purpose. These are Little Barrier Island in the north near Auckland, and Resolution Island near the Sounds in the southwest. No doubt, in the unexplored country behind the Sounds, there are still plenty of birds, but there again it is only a matter of time before they are exterminated. Though there are wild dogs escaped from civilization, they are in no great numbers, as a wild life does not seem to suit them, and they soon die out. End of chapter 3.